Hi and welcome to the LJMU Together LGBT plus staff network LGBT History Month event. That was quite a lot of things to get out in one go event. So this is our Giants Question Open Forum. My name is B. Hughes and I am the Community Liaison Officer for the LGBT plus staff network here at Liverpool John Moores University. And I am also here today as a Giant, which is the Gendered Intelligence Activist network of trans spokespeople. Lots of acronyms to get through today. And I'm here with Adi Daly Gordialsing, who has kindly offered to come and speak to us and, along with me, answer any questions and discuss what it's like being a trans person in 2021, and maybe a little bit about kind of being trans when we were students and things like that. So I've already mentioned Gendered Intelligence. So Gendered Intelligence is an amazing trans-led charity based here in the UK, and they do lots of work supporting and advocating for trans people of all ages. So as well as trans young people. There are other great charities that also do brilliant work that focus on, for example, trans children like Mermaids, but Gendered Intelligence has a much broader kind of coverage of people of all ages. And last year they launched the first cohort of the Giants programme, which is a kind of programme to help support grassroots activists to kind of do projects in their communities around promoting more positive representations of trans people because of the widespread kind of transphobia and transphobic representation of trans people in the press and broader society. The second cohort of Giants will be opening soon to applications, which is really exciting, and I can't wait to go through seeing the process of the second kind of group of people coming into the programme. So that's kind of a little bit of context, and a shout out to Gendered Intel, who are amazing in every way. And yeah, so as I've already said, I'm B. I'm non-binary and or trans. I kind of see that one as another unnecessary binary in the world for me. So I use they, them pronouns, and I kind of have been out and realised I was non-binary for, I don't know, the last 3 years or so. So I've come to it a little bit later than some, but have always been kind of questioning and confused about gender in general, but only had the words to be able to explain it more recently. So I feel like a baby trans person in that sense. There's lots of really great kind of writing about how you kind of trans time is different to cis time in that we come out at different stages and feel like we're at different stages of our lives. So that's me. So I would like to pass over to Adi now to tell us a little bit about her.
Hi everybody, so I'm Adi Daly Gordialsing. My pronouns are she, her. I'm a fellow colleague of on the Giants programme with Gendered Intelligence, which I joined in the first cohort along with B and about, I think, 10 or so, or maybe 15 other trans people. And for me, Gendered Intelligence is all about, obviously they have their remit for sort of reaching out, the research that they do, the support that they have, especially for young people. So they run quite a few support groups for sort of young people, I think from a sort of around 11 to about 25, is it B? It's around that age range, which obviously is a really important time for young people in their own development, but also you kind of add another level of being trans and understanding your transness at the very same time. So it's a fantastic group, and as Giants, we're kind of there to support each other. I think that's the main way I look at it. We have sort of regular meetings where we might focus on particular projects that we might be looking at, and they tend to be projects that are led by what's happening in the world of discussion around trans matters at that particular time. They're not reactive, but they're kind of in real time. So, you know, if something happens like the GRA consultation, or for example, like there's a government consultation just been launched on access to spaces, and the main focus, I believe, is on public toilets. And so gender intelligence is the sort of group, the giants are the sort of people who would be able to look at that and go, right, okay, how can we group together to come out with a statement or run a project that's about sort of getting the word out to people. In terms of my own journey, I'm a bit like B. Well, actually slightly different. I knew I was trans when I was about 6 or 7, but I didn't have, like B, I didn't have the words back then, and that's quite common for a lot of trans people. And I think knowing that from that age has influenced all of my childhood and a lot of my adulthood, especially around studying, being a student, and academia. I came out later in life as well. At the time I came out and started thinking about myself and giving myself that time, I was the average age of a trans woman coming out in that way. And at that time, it was sort of pushing 40s. So I've come out quite late. And I'll go back to sort of how I was, you know, how my early life shaped all of that. So I come from quite a religious, strict cultural background, which kind of meant that women are definitely women and men are definitely men. And there wasn't even any discussion about being bisexual or gay or anything like that. I went to church school, so I went to Catholic schools. I was even sent away to boarding school, all boys school, to sort of toughen me up and make me a man. And that really shaped my early childhood, especially in my education. I was dealing with that and dealing with that sort of background. And I'm also dyslexic, which also was on top of that. So that meant by the time I left primary school, I practically knew nothing. I didn't know the alphabet. I didn't know my times tables. I barely knew how to write. So when I went to secondary school or senior school, I was in the bottom group for absolutely everything. I knew that I wasn't stupid, and I kind of felt I wasn't supposed to be in those groups, but I couldn't really address it because I was struggling internally as well with my gender, especially being at an all boys school. So I kind of put up a lot of mechanisms and sort of plodded through, got my GCSEs, just enough to get to university and study environmental sciences in the Northeast. And I think that shaped a lot of my time at university as well. I put a lot behind, I repressed a lot. And when I got to university, I started to see people that I hadn't seen before. I started to see sort of gender non-conforming people. I started to see a few non-binary people, which I didn't understand at all at that time. Absolutely didn't understand it. And I started to see some trans people, but at that time, the trans people that I saw were almost the stereotype of a trans person, and they were mostly sort of trans women. And I wasn't brave enough at that time to come out, and that really affected my studies because I was dealing with that. I desperately wanted to explore myself. I desperately wanted to be me, and that was a massive distraction to the point that I just didn't even feel like I could join the LGBT plus society at the time. I didn't want to out myself. I didn't want to put myself in danger. I'd suffered violence already for being quite. I'm attracted to women, but when I was presenting and having to live life as a boy, I was what we'd probably term as a bit effeminate. You know, people would say, "Oh, you're gay," and I had been abused and physically abused for it on a number of occasions, just randomly. So there was a lot of fear there. My cousins would, my cousins would, you know, call me the gay cousin and take the mick out of me. And I've got a lot of family. I've got, you know, quite a few cousins, and most of them are older than me. So again, that had an impact on whether, you know, I was brave enough to come out, and I wasn't. And whilst I was at university, I met my now wife, and we've been together all that time through this point. So I ended up not finishing my studies. I pulled out just before the third year of environmental science, and I have to say it's something I regret. And I'm in this room right now with people who are academic, and I'm really quite jealous because I've never had the chance to go back. Sometimes I think about sort of jacking in all of the sort of work I'm doing in terms of activist work, you know, gendered intelligence. I do a bit of work for Spectra London for mentoring. I also work in transgender healthcare as well as a head of research and development. And sometimes I feel like jacking it in and going, right, I just want to study. I want to study. I want 10 years of academia. So it is something that really, you know, really appeals to me. And if I look back, I'm incredibly thankful for where I am right now and everything that I have. But if I was to go back, I would have done things very differently. I would have been honest to myself, and I probably would have given myself a chance at studying, at finishing university, and actually probably carrying on in academia. So that's kind of where I am and how important I think being true to yourself is when it comes to sort of taking that step in your studies, whether that's taking your options at GCSE or, you know, going through to A level and choosing to go to university. So that's kind of where I come from and how important I think it is in terms of you being yourself. Okay, I think I've gone on.
No, that's great. Thanks, Eddie. No, that was really like wonderfully kind of open. Thank you so much for sharing your experience with us. It kind of got me thinking about, you know, as with being, as you said, a room of people that work in education, how much have you noticed through kind of your activist work and your mentorship role a change in the support that's available to young people? I think we've touched on it a little bit, but from when you were at university to now, I think that obviously culturally there's been a huge shift in terms of support that's available and kind of the visibility of trans people. But is that something that comes through in your kind of activist work as a positive at all?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely see what's really encouraging to me is so obviously I do my work with Spectra. I work in transgender healthcare as well for a private provider. I do some work with Green Party and obviously GI. And what's really encouraging is the number of young people who are, lots of them are only a few years out of university, and some haven't even gone to university and have just finished A levels and are, you know, grassroots activists. And I find that really encouraging, B, to see that and see those individuals so strong and so confident. And when I left university, I can't imagine that was going on. I mean, I have to admit, I didn't look for it, but as somebody who was kind of aware of things going around and you know, things in the news happening and you know, wanting for a better world, I think I would have noticed it at the time. And I do believe strongly that's a massive change from when I finished my time at university to young people now, especially with GI. GI is full, I think, of younger people, and I think I'm a bit of an outlier with a couple of others being a bit older. And also what's really encouraging as well, B, is the number of non-binary people in groups like GI. I think actually non-binary people outnumber the binary people in GI, which I think is incredibly encouraging. And I personally see that's, you know, how I see that in how people are understanding that as a concept, but that for themselves as well. And, you know, some people will go through, I'm non-binary, and then maybe, and it's the same for trans people, and then 10, 15 years time, they might go, oh, actually, no, I might be a bit more binary, or vice versa. Somebody might be very binary and then decide 10 years later, actually, no, binary suits me. And I think that's the main change, is that people have been given the opportunity to think and to understand themselves a little bit more, which was probably not there 15, 20 years ago, or even 10 years ago. I think it's a welcome development and something I've noticed.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Eddie. I definitely agree, and I think the kind of huge not kind of explosion, but the way that the concept of non-binary gender has become much more well known, and there does seem to be, we were just talking about the development of kind of non-binary as a concept that people understand in general, and how amazing it is that it seems to be quite kind of widespread in its use and its understanding, even more than it was previously, and certainly more from the last kind of 10 years or so. So we've got a few pre-submitted questions that Holly's kindly put in the chat, and then we've also, if anyone here wants to ask us questions live, you can put them in the chat or ask them in a moment. So to get the ball rolling, so you're not just listening to me a lot, I'll read out the first of the questions, and then me and Addy can try and answer them. So first question is, in relation to sexual orientation versus gender identity, do the lines blur, and how do you determine how you identify in relation to sexual attraction when you are discovering yourself? Quite a lot in that. It's a big question. I can try and answer it first if you like, Addy.
Yeah, absolutely. Go for it.
This sort of follows on a little bit from what I write about in my own research, and links to the lecture I was giving earlier this afternoon, actually. So I felt like accidentally prepared for this one. So I think a lot of this, for me, it stems a little bit from kind of cultural legibility and readability, and how you are read by other people in relation to the world and others around you, and how that interplays with your own sense of identity. So for me personally, kind of my gender and sexuality are different, they're separate. You know, my gender is non-binary, and a bit fluid. Sometimes it's a little bit over here, sometimes it's a little bit over there, but my sexuality is separate, and I guess I would say I'm probably pansexual. If I can't pin down my own gender, how can I pin it down in someone else and in a sexual partner? But because I've been in a relationship with a cis man for 10 years now, and when we first started going out, I identified as cis, and now I don't. You know, for a lot of people that have known us for our whole relationship, or to people that might just see us in the street and not know anything about my identity, they would just read us as a cis couple, which is a really strange thing, to have my kind of identity erased in that way. And I find, you know, the way that it erases my gender identity more annoying than the way it erases my sexuality, because my partner's just my partner. I don't really think of his gender identity or his sexuality in relation to me. But yeah, it's really, they are separate, and I don't think you have to put a label on your sexual attraction. It's just who you're attracted to, perhaps. What are your thoughts on that, Addy?
Well, I would just add to that a little bit, because I absolutely agree with you. I think it's very, very easy for that question to come up. I think it's a go-to question for a lot of people who don't, it's a go-to question for people who don't understand being trans, whether that's binary or non-binary. And it's a go-to question for many trans people, I think, because of how we reflect back in society. part of the way we reflect back is in our sexuality. We see it around us all the time. My observations of that is, while they're not mutually exclusive, they are very independent. And my advice to anybody who was looking at their gender would be to deal with those two things separately, gender and sexuality, and then see how they come together once you've kind of addressed both of those things and you're comfortable with your gender and you're comfortable with your sexuality. Because I think if you try and deal with them both at the same time, that can hold you back and hold you back in your development, in which other you try to decide to look at first. And in terms of the way people see you and they kind of erase your gender, that's a really interesting point, B. And I can absolutely see that. If you've been with somebody who's cis and you've been seen as a cis couple before, people are going to look at you, the people who know you already, and make those assumptions. And I guess a lot of what they say and do to you will be gendered in that way. And I can see how that's incredibly frustrating. In terms of my own experience, it's slightly different. When I met my partner now, I was presenting as cis and as a cis male, as a cis man. So to the world, we were a heterosexual couple. And it's amazing how we didn't really even think about the world looking at us as a heterosexual couple. But now that we are not perceived as a heterosexual couple when we're out, we will be perceived as a lesbian couple. It's interesting how much people are bothered about that and your sexuality, and how they're kind of like, how that's very, very different from the way people look at heterosexual, where it really isn't a consideration. But then they seem to be quite obsessed when they're seeing something that's not cis and cis heteronormative. So yeah, that would be my view on it. I think kind of look at these things separately, find it for yourself, and then you can deal with the way that the world perceives you a little bit better. You'd be a bit more, sort of bit stronger, I guess, to be able to do that.
That's great, thanks, Eddie. And yeah, I think it's really that point you make about the way that now that you're perceived and seen as you are as a lesbian couple, that, you know, for me, the misgendering of me puts me in a position of safety, whereas you know, so I'm not, you know, I appreciate that I have that privilege and that kind of safety net, whereas we have all seen the kind of increase in homophobic attacks that have been happening, and not everyone has the same kind of misgendering. Isn't safe for everyone, I guess, is the unfortunate worrying thing. So before we go to another pre-submitted question, would anyone here like to ask me or Eddie a question, or share anything, or have any comments? No pressure, you don't have to, just
I think I just wanted to say thank you to you both for being so open and honest, and I wish there was more people here to listen to you. And I think as well, I mean, I'd agree that I've seen, like, I've been teaching 20 years here now, and I've seen a real change in students' attitudes, and I think one of the things I wanted to ask is, what can kind of the university do, if you like, to support? I know one of the questions coming up is, how can you be a good ally? But what can the university, if you like, as an institution, do to support students?
Great question. Thanks, Kay. That was really kind of you to say that to start with. I wish there was some students here because they could tell us what they want. It's a tough one, isn't it?
There's like the hate crime committee, but I don't think there's anything that specifically deals with transgender issues. I mean, I think it's just included in that umbrella of hate crime, and that's all I'm aware of. There might be other things I don't know. Holly might know. Sorry, did you?
No, that's okay. Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, one of the things that I've noticed a lot, in terms of, like, now that we're working in like this digital format and online all the time, is how that creates a different dynamic for outing people or allowing people to be comfortable in their gender. So again, you know, I'm comfortable in being out at work, and I put my pronouns in my Zoom name all the time, and you know, try and set a good example of visibility for my students. But at the same time, there are other parts of the kind of digital world of the university at the moment that are much more rigid and can't be changed and can't be molded to fit different identities. So we're using Zoom right now, but when we use Teams, which I have to use for some meetings with students and meetings with my colleagues, I can't change my name on that, and I can't add my pronouns. So in Teams meetings, I'm always misgendered. So, you know, by everyone from the Vice Chancellor to like people I work with every day. So it's, you know, that would be one thing, to look at how we can make sure that every part of the digital estate, to use the annoying buzzword of the year, can be more accommodating and make sure that it is a safe space. But again, that's a double-edged sword, because there are lots of people that might not be comfortable and feel safe in their home environment to be able to be outed or to be out while they're, you know, working online from home. Unfortunately, they might not have that safety in their living situation. So that's kind of a thing that would be helpful now. But what else? I'm not sure. Is there anything that you can think of, or anything that you've heard of other places doing, Addy, through your mentorship work?
No.
Oh, I think we're losing internet connection a little bit. Oh, I'm sorry, Addy, you froze then. Would you mind starting again?
Okay, sorry. I think I'm struggling with signal, and I don't know why, because I'm on my booster, so I'm not sure why. I would just add maybe that, or sort of add to your point, that more of an effort to try and understand the limitations of things like technology, especially now that we're doing things on Zoom and doing things online, Teams, and just ask the teams that are in charge of that, from the chancellors down, that that they have an understanding that somebody like B would be in the room and not have their pronouns on screen, and how that might affect that individual. I definitely think there's a lot of learning to do, because I see people getting misgendered all the time for no real good reason, and you look at it and go, how on earth and why did that happen, kind of thing. And also language. I think language is really important.
Oh, we'll see if Addy comes back in a second. There must be someone. Oh, sorry, you froze again.
Yeah.
You just got to where you said language is really important.
Okay, so I'm really sorry. I don't know what.
That's okay.
Language is really important. So neutralizing language, I think, is a good thing to do. You know, there's a good argument to say you don't have to gender the language. You know, there's plenty of provisions within the English language to not gender it, and that could be a way forward, more comfortable. Especially like you said, B, there are people who will be in environments, possibly at home, where they are not out. So that can work both ways, can't it? People could know that that person is non-binary, but the people they're around in their home don't know that. So maybe looking at things like to neutralize the language that people use and try and sort of shape that in terms of going forward. But yeah, if that makes sense. It kind of does in my head. I'm not sure if it has verbally.
It does, yeah. No, thank you, Addy. Great. Okay, so the next pre-submitted question is another biggie. So What can people do to be a genuine ally of the LGBTQIA+ community?
Shall I go first, Bea, this time?
Yeah, you go first. That would be great.
I've got one simple, it's listen, and listen to trans people. I think every trans person will tell you that. Just listen to us. People are increasingly listening to us because a lot of people don't understand trans people. They don't understand who we are, what it is what change it is that we want in society. A question that comes up all of the time is, well, what rights don't you have? And I think it's the biggest thing for me is listening, and perhaps we only need to say things once or twice before it kind of sinks in, because it's like when you go to a doctor and a doctor GP, for example, doesn't know anything about being trans or referring you on for affirmative care. You're the expert patient, and being trans is like being the expert patient all the time, especially on social media. There's this expectation that we should be continuously educating people. So I would say, first of all, it's absolutely fantastic when people want to know more, when people want to broaden their minds, and people want to be accepting, and all they want to do is understand. And definitely feel that for those people, we are definitely there to say, okay, listen to us, fantastic, I'm glad you're listening to us, and you can go away and be better informed and inform other people. But I would say, in addition to that, please research things yourself, read around the subject, if you like, I think is how we would call it, reading around the subject. Don't expect that all to come from one place, because if I'm perfectly honest, for example, on my LGBT Greens work, or my Greens work, Green Party work, I don't talk or consider anything other than the situation with LGBT and especially trans at the moment. I haven't got any bandwidth to talk about green things, and that's quite ironic, really, because the reason I'm part of that movement, that party, is my belief about the environment and what we should be doing. But I'm really not concentrating on that, because I'm a huge amount of my efforts going into sort of educating and advocating and being an activist. I think there'll come a point where we don't have to do that. But for cis people, for non-trans people, my main thing is to be the best ally is about listening to us and then going away, reading around the subject, becoming more informed on your own time, and then spreading the word and being active. It's like anything. If you say you're pro-trans or you're anti-racist, you have to actually do something. You have to be there, do it. It doesn't help for it to be performative. There needs to be action there as well. It can't just be a couple of words on social media of solidarity. There has to be something meaningful. Now, there's no obligation for anybody to do that, of course, but if you're asking the question, how can I be a better trans ally? For me, that's the answer. It's the answer. Take on some of that responsibility yourself, and go out there and be a true ally. I would say that would be my main advice.
That's brilliant.
Sorry, my very to the point and candid advice.
It was perfect, thank you. And I don't think I could add very much to that, really, other than to say, when you go off and do your research, this is me with my lecturer hat on, make sure you check what that source is. So don't get your information about trans people from the Daily Mail or the Sun or even the Guardian or the BBC. Get it from the experts, the people, us, the charities that support trans people and trans kids. And it's so easy to find amazingly talented trans people that we do all sorts of jobs. We're everywhere. That you can follow on social media, that you can kind of get to know about our opinions on all things trans and beyond, and really see the work that's happening in the trans community to support one another, and see what you can do to support that work.
That's a really good point, B. I think I've always thought, well, I'm increasingly thinking the least interesting thing about a trans person is them that they're trans, because they will be lecturers, they will be designers, they will be, you know, librarians, they will be mechanics, there'll be all sorts of, and then there'll be walkers and runners and, you know, football players and all sorts of things. And you know, there's so much more to a trans person, and I think give that part of being a trans ally is definitely is giving trans people that space to breathe as well. I think that's really important. So again, it's about taking on that responsibility for yourself if you want to be a true ally, and you know, go for sources, go to the organizations, the people like GI, Mermaids for Younger People, Stonewall, lots of these organizations out there. The people who work for those, who put that information out there, they're paid to do that job. So take advantage of that and get your information from these really, really reliable sources. I would also say, if you're a young person or a parent and you want to know more about being a trans ally, don't get your information from people like Transgender Trend, for example. A misleading name. They're abhorrent, and I would stay very, very, very far away from them. Talk to trans people for the resources. We're good at that. We're good at signposting you to the right places to go to that are pro-trans and trans-friendly.
Yeah, great, absolutely. Thank you, Addy. So I'll give it a pause on the pre-submitted questions for a minute to just ask if anyone here has anything. I know Kay's already chipped in. Don't feel you have to again. Or Ray, did you want to say anything? Also, no pressure. No, that's fine, because we've got loads of pre-submitted questions. But I think we'll run through maybe a couple more, and then we'll close up.
Okay.
So I'm going to skip down a couple, because I realise we're using a lot of acronyms and terminology that not everyone will be familiar with. So a pre-submitted question here is, there are lots of terminologies in relation to gender identity and sexual orientation. Could you tell us a few of the most common ones and what they mean? For example, pansexual, cisgender, MTF, FTM, gender fluid, non-binary, etc. So I'll pick up first, since I said one of these earlier. So I said pansexual. So that is a word to refer to sexual orientation, where you are attracted to people of all genders. So it's the suffix pan or prefix pan. I'm not very good educator there, getting them mixed up. Yeah, meaning all. So the gender of the people that you're attracted to could be anything, anywhere in the galaxy of gender. I'll also do non-binary, since I introduced that. So non-binary is a term that refers to someone that doesn't identify as either the binary position of male or female. They fall somewhere in between, beyond, outside. Some non-binary people kind of would say they're right in the middle. Some non-binary people are somewhere else around that kind of binary spectrum, galaxy, whatever you want to call it. The one thing to do with non-binary that I would say is the biggest misconception is that non-binary people have no gender. That's not the case at all. Non-binary people are greedy. We have too much gender, if anything. We want a bit of all of them. Well, I can't speak for all non-binary people, but that's how I feel. There are people who feel that they don't have any gender at all, and the term for that would be agender, as opposed to non-binary. So that's a few terms. Are there any that you'd like to offer some definition or comment for, Eddie?
Well, I can't give an absolute true definition of cisgender, but I'll tell you what it means to me, cisgender, because I think cisgender is quite an emotive, or cis for short is quite emotive. So you'll probably find within the public discourse, you'll see people who belong to the gender critical side of discussions. You'll see you'll see them saying kind of, don't call me cis, I'm not cis, cis is a slur, for example. I think cis is obviously a word that's been around for a very long time, and I think, if I'm not wrong, it means other side of. Is that right, B? I think that's it. But anyway, in modern terms, it's to describe anybody who's not trans, who doesn't identify as trans. And many cis people use that, especially allies, and they wear it with a badge of honor, I think. They're proud to say that they are cis, and by saying cis, they're usually saying that I'm also an ally of trans people. So I think that's really important, the way that language is, that way that language is used. It's also really useful as well in terms of differentiating between people who might be hostile towards you as a trans person and people who are not. But that doesn't mean that everybody, for example, has to put their pronouns in their bio. Plenty of trans people don't do that. But what you'll see commonly is cis people who are happy to put pronouns in their bio are also happy to call themselves cis and refer to themselves as cis, as a way of inserting themselves into any particular conversation in a way that they think is relevant. I'd like to deal with the male to female, female to male, or the shortened. I think what I like about the trans movement and the way and the community and the way that we are moving is, we're kind of moving away from language that is rooted in pathologizing and medicalizing trans people. And male to female, female to male is one of those. It's still used a lot, and it's still used a lot by trans people, but increasingly trans people are moving away from that. I think, actually, interestingly, I had a thought the other day, the bigger platform that non-binary people have got within the trans community now, I think, is helping shape that conversation and shape those words. Actually, male to female, female to male is completely redundant for most non-binary people. It doesn't kind of work in the same way, and that makes you question it yourself. So I questioned that when I first came out. The only language that I knew was M to F, male to female. But increasingly I look at that and go, well, actually, I was never male. And that's a really, really pertinent point. You know, I've always been female. That's who I've always been. I was pretending to be male, but I was never male. And I think what's useful about these acronyms is just to understand how relevant they are at any point in time, how relevant they are to a conversation, but how relevant they are to that conversation at that point in time, in terms of the in line with the evolution of the language happening at that time. And it's things like, I think, transsexual and transvestite and words like that are commonly seen. It's increasingly archaic now. They're having a less of a place. They still mean a lot to a lot of people. So, for example, transsexual means a lot to maybe older trans people, you know, who transitioned and went through GRS surgery and have medically transitioned 20 years ago, 10, 15, 20 years ago, when there wasn't the support, and there certainly wasn't opportunities like this at universities to speak about the subject. And those words are really, really important to them. But I know in my day job, working in transgender healthcare, we look at language a lot, and we look at the acronyms, and we look at our own use of language. And we find it really difficult as an advocate, as a very pro-trans organization, to sometimes separate ourselves from that language that's actually quite dated and people are moving away from, because it's so rooted in medicine, in healthcare, in pathologizing people, and it's difficult for us to move away. But there's a real movement to do that, and I think it's just really important to understand how that impacts on any words that come out. and male to female, female to male. While some people are comfortable with that, lots of people are not, because it doesn't accurately describe them. So again, it's about also sort of think about the language, but also kind of neutralizing it in some ways.
Yeah, thanks, Adi. That was brilliant. Thank you for taking on cis and MTF, MTM. Those were two big ones.
Yeah.
A term that's become much more common, or some terms that have become much more common recently, have been the terms assigned female at birth or assigned male at birth, which I think is a way to try and step out of that binary, like one to the other kind of suggestion that comes from MTF, MTM, though, yeah, and it describes kind of more the process of having been, someone else has decided your gender for you, as Judith Butler would say, referring again to my lecturing earlier, that you are girled or you're boyed, your gender is brought into being by people labeling you as such. So that's kind of a slightly more up-to-date terminology, but there will be people that are not hugely comfortable with that as well, I would say. So there was, you managed to sneak in an extra acronym when you were speaking, Adi. You said GRS surgery. So maybe we'll take that as our last thing to talk about, just in terms of telling people what it is. And it also links, I think, to what you were talking about, you know, this very medicalized language that we're forced into using in institutions, particularly, partly because of in terms of healthcare, because of the medicalized nature of that space, but also, for example, in universities, because of things like the law. So the language in the Equality Act is now very outdated. So even though it protects trans and now non-binary people, as it has been kind of upheld in an appeal court, the language of the Equality Act doesn't actually reflect the way that we currently conceptualize and talk about transness. So GRS would be gender reassignment surgery, usually, right?
Yeah, well, I don't know what the correct acronym actually is.
No.
There's a few of them.
Yes, there are.
And I accept that some people have a much bigger much bigger importance on gender confirming surgery or reassigning surgery, whatever you want to see. So I personally believe it's down to that individual on how they feel comfortable about it. But you're right, B, that in a medical background, it's pathologized and it has to be there. And like the GRA, the language is already very old and archaic, and in addition to that, obviously legislation in this country needs to be appealed for it to have any effect. So in terms of non-binary being covered by the GRA, that has only happened because of an appeal case that would have been won. And for example, in the GRA, it's kind of woolly as well. It's not very tight in its definition, is it, B? It's kind of like actually reassignment. I think it's reassignment, gender reassignment they refer to, but that actually is very arbitrary and it's quite broad. And now that kind of helps trans people, but it also it's a bit worryingly vague, I think. So actually what it means in the GRA is, and the GRA for an acronyms is the Gender Recognition Act. What it means is that anybody at any point has decided to transition from one gender to another now, and that includes obviously non-binary people, and again, it's very woolly on how that applies. I think it's a source of difficulty for both parties, for those people who are advocating for trans rights and those people who are advocating against trans rights. There's frustrations both there because it's so kind of broad. I think it falls much more in favor to trans people because it opens itself up to appeal cases which can ratify it, which is a good thing. But yeah, those acronyms GRS and SRS, you know, that again, they're pathologized, they're in they're medical. I saw some, oh my goodness, I saw some terminologies the other day which were like 1950s, 60s, and it's still floating around. And my goodness, update it, please, just update it. It's really, really old. It's offensive. Yeah, so I think it's down to the individual, how they feel about that word, and also the people that they're speaking to. So if they're speaking to somebody in a medical capacity, i.e. it's about their surgery, the people they're speaking to, the provider of that care, should be led by the individual and how they want to term it. It's just being thoughtful like that. And unfortunately, lots of surgeons and lots of clinicians at the moment are very, very keen on pathologizing trans people and making sure that trans people follow strict guidelines in terms of what it means to be trans and what's available for them. Yeah, so just being flexible about that language, I think, is really important.
Thanks, Addy. So we're coming up to 3 minutes to 5. So although there were a few more questions in the chat, maybe we could answer those offline and post them somewhere on our EDI website. But I would like to thank Addy so much for joining us today and for sharing her experiences and insight into trans experience. And thank you, Kay and Ray and Holly, and everyone else that's watching this later. So thank you very much, and good evening.
Good evening, everybody.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.